So, imagine you're waking up on a random Saturday morning in January 2026. You reach for your phone, still half asleep, and you see a notification that looks like a glitch in the Matrix. It's a photo, grainy, high contrast, posted to Truth Social. It shows a man in a rumpled suit, blindfolded, wearing heavy noise-canceling headphones, sitting on the deck of a US Navy warship. You blink, rub your eyes, and look again. That man is Nicolas Maduro, the sitting president of Venezuela. And the ship is the USS Iwo Jima. Welcome, traveler. You are witnessing the single most audacious military legal gamble in the history of the 21st century. This isn't just a news cycle, this is Operation Absolute Resolve. It's the moment the world's most powerful nation decided that sovereignty was a secondary concern to a wanted poster. We're going to spend the next 10 minutes breaking down exactly how 150 aircraft, a $50 million bounty, and a decades-old grudge led to the first time a superpower has literally kidnapped a head of state from his own palace since 1989. To understand why this happened on January 3, 2026, we have to look at the lore of the beef. This isn't just about politics, it's personal. For years, the US has been building a case that Maduro wasn't just a bad leader, but a boss. Specifically, the boss of the cartel of the Suns. The Department of Justice unsealed an indictment claiming Maduro was using the Venezuelan military as a giant logistics firm for the FARC and Mexican cartels to flood the US with cocaine. But here's the pattern interrupt you need to know. The US didn't just wake up and decide to do this. This was a slow-motion car crash that started back in September 2025. The US Navy started a campaign called Operation Southern Spear. They were out in the Caribbean sinking narco subs and seizing oil tankers like it was a game of battleship. By December, the US had already killed over 100 people in these skirmishes. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Maduro was bragging on TV that his unhackable Chinese phones kept him safe from US spies. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Now, imagine you're in the shoes of a Delta Force operator on the night of January 3rd. It's 2:01 a.m. in Caracas. You're flying so low in a Black Hawk that you can see the laundry hanging on the balconies of the apartment buildings in the El Valle neighborhood. This wasn't shock and awe like Iraq. This was a surgical strike. While 150 aircraft, F-22 Raptors, B-1B Lancers, and F-35S were circling the coast to suppress air defenses, the apprehension force was focused on one spot, Fort Tuna. Fort Tuna is the nerve center of the Venezuelan military. It's where Maduro lived because he didn't trust the presidential palace. He had a deep, reinforced bunker. But the US had been building a pattern of life on him for months. They knew exactly which door he'd be behind. I'm not going to lie to you, it was a bloodbath. The White House later called the operation very violent. You had Maduro's personal guard, which included 32 elite Cuban special forces, fighting to the death. There's a 9-meter wide crater now at the entrance of the bunker, where the US used specialized munitions just to get through the door. By 4:29 a.m., Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, were zip-tied and in the air. Imagine the silence in the Venezuelan capital when the sun came up and the president was just gone. No coup, no revolution. Just a void where the government used to be. But let's talk about the yap factor, the part where things get messy. Why did the US really do it? If you ask the Trump administration, it's about law and order. Attorney General Pam Bondi stood in front of a camera and laid out the charges: narco-terrorism, cocaine importation, and possession of machine guns. They're treating a world leader like a guy they caught in a strike operation in a Florida parking lot. But if you look at the deeper layers, there's a big O word hanging over everything: oil. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, 300 billion barrels. Maduro had those reserves locked down, trading with Russia, China, and Iran. After the capture, Trump didn't hold back. He said the US would run the country until a transition happened, and that the biggest US oil companies were going in to fix the infrastructure and start making money for the country. Now, pause for a second. Can you imagine the legal nightmare this is creating? Maduro is currently sitting in a jail cell in New York, probably the same one they used for El Chapo or Sam Bankman-Fried. He's pleading not guilty. His lawyers are arguing sovereign immunity, which is basically the high-level version of, "You can't touch me, I'm the president." But the US counter-argument is cold. "We don't recognize you as president, so you're just a guy with a suitcase full of drug money." It's the Manuel Noriega strategy from 1989 all over again, but on steroids and with TikTok watching. While Maduro is in New York, back in Caracas, things are weirdly quiet. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez has been sworn in as acting president. The US is playing a game of good cop, bad cop with her. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is basically telling her, "You can cooperate, release political prisoners, and let our oil companies in, or we can send the planes back for a second wave." And guess what? It's working. Within days, she started releasing American prisoners. The US is using Maduro's capture as the ultimate leverage to force Venezuela back into the US orbit without having to occupy the whole country. But here's the real kicker, traveler. This move has sent shockwaves through every capital in the world. If you're a leader in a country the US doesn't like, you're not looking at your palace the same way today. You're looking at your bunker and wondering if those walls are actually 9 meters thick. Wait, we're in far right corner of all the others formally unfold. Wait. We're just getting started. See, throughout May 2025, it wasn't just about the Navy blockading ports. It was about the Tren de Aragua. That's a Venezuelan gang that the US claims was acting as Maduro's vanguard on American soil. Trump explicitly said they were invading the US. And while Maduro's government actually went on the offensive against them recently, the US didn't care about the facts. They cared about the narrative. They linked the gang to the president, turning a local crime issue into a national security emergency. And let's talk about the evidence for a minute. The US says they got 7 tons of cocaine directly traced back to Maduro. How? They've been picking off his inner circle for years. Remember Hugo El Pollo Carvajal? The former Maduro says the second seed starts covering the battles of power, but the Constitution did not share anything with terrorism. The first international contract of the seeds, Maduro says the second seed starts covering the battles of terrorism in a state for the content. Guy's been in a US room for months, singing like a bird about every flight log, every hidden airstrip, and every suitcase of cash that moved through Caracas. They didn't just stumble into Fortuna. They had the blueprint, because the guys who built it were the ones who sold him out. And then there's the Chinese angle. Why didn't China step in? You'd think they'd protect their biggest oil interest in the West. But the word on the street is that the US made backroom deal. Basically, China gets to keep its debt repayments if they stay out of the way. Maduro thought he was part of a global alliance. He realized too late he was just a bargaining chip. But we can't ignore the Russian factor. Putin was furious, or at least he pretended to be. Russia has billions tied up in Venezuelan gold and weapons contracts. They called it an act of state-sponsored piracy. But while they were shouting at the UN, the US was already moving their chess pieces. They essentially told Moscow, "Keep your hands off, or we'll start looking into your Mediterranean ports." It was a masterclass in nuclear-era bullying. Now, imagine the atmosphere in that Manhattan courtroom. You've got the world's cameras pressed against the glass. Maduro walks in, no medals, no military sash, just a plain orange jumpsuit. The judge asks him for his name, and for the first time in his life, his voice shakes. He realizes that in this room, he's not the big boss. He's just defendant number 1. The prosecution pulls out the smoking gun. A set of flight logs from a private hangar in Apure. They show Maduro's own signature authorizing special cargo flights that landed in Honduras before the drugs were moved into Texas. If those logs are real, it's game over. He's looking at life in a ADX Florence, the Alcatraz of the Rockies, alongside the very people he used to do business with. The reaction in the streets of Caracas is the most haunting part. It's not a celebration, and it's not a riot. It's a stunned silence. People are walking around wondering if the grocery stores will finally have food or if the US Marines are going to be on the next street corner. It's a mix of hope and sheer, unadulterated terror. Because when a giant falls, everyone nearby gets hit by the debris. So, why did the United States capture the Venezuelan president? Because they decided the rules of the 20th century didn't apply to the 21st. They turned a geopolitical stalemate into a criminal case, used a $50 million bounty as a justification for a raid, and redrew the map of South America in a single night. They show that in the modern world, a border is just a line on a map if you've got enough F-35s and a warrant signed by a judge in Brooklyn. It's the ultimate lesson in power. You're only as strong as the people who are willing to fight for you. And on January 3rd, it turns out, nobody was willing to die for the man in the bunker. Anyway, welcome, traveler. That's the story of how the world changed while you were sleeping. We've gone from diplomacy to apprehension. And there's no going back now. What's the next move? Do you want to dive into the specific evidence they're using in the New York trial? We're talking secret recordings and flight logs. Or do you want to see how the rest of the axis of resistance is scrambling to secure their own palaces?